Most of them walked into the Battle of Hogwarts as students. They walked out as something else entirely. Harry became the most feared dark wizard hunter in a generation. Hermione dismantled laws that had stood for centuries. Neville, who once couldn't manage a simple Wingardium Leviosa, shaped every Hogwarts student who came after him. But not everyone rebuilt the same way. Some left the world that nearly killed them. Some stayed and changed it. And at least one walked away from power entirely, choosing a quieter life that nobody saw coming. Today, we're mapping exactly what every major character did after the war. The careers, the pivots, the surprising retirements. But one of them ended up in a role so unexpected that even their closest friends didn't see it coming. Who is it? And why did it take a war to get them there? Harry Potter. Harry Potter became an Auror. Because of course he did. The boy who spent 7 years being hunted by the most dangerous dark wizard in history was always going to spend his 20s hunting dark wizards professionally. It would have been strange if he hadn't. He joined the Auror office directly after the war. No newts required, given that his practical experience included facing Voldemort 4 times and surviving. The Ministry, to their credit, decided the exam was probably a formality. He rose fast. He was appointed head of the Auror office at 26, the youngest in the department's history. By his mid-30s, he had moved again, taking over as head of magical law enforcement, overseeing not just dark wizard apprehension, but the entire legal architecture of the wizarding world. The interesting detail is what he did with that power. Harry had grown up watching the Ministry fail spectacularly. Protect the wrong people, bury the wrong evidence, ignore the wrong threats. He knew exactly where it rotted from the inside. He spent the better part of 2 decades pulling those pieces out. He also found time to have 3 children, named 2 of them after dead people, and coach his son's Quidditch team with an intensity that reportedly made other parents uncomfortable. He earned it. If Harry rebuilt the system, the next person on this list rebuilt the laws that ran it. Hermione Granger. Hermione didn't start at the top. She started at the bottom, and she was furious about it. Post-war, she went back and sat her newts. She had already spent a year dismantling Voldemort's regime, but apparently felt the formal qualifications were still relevant. She joined the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, specifically to reform the legislation around house elf rights, the cause she had been shouting about since 3rd year while everyone around her stared at the ceiling. She got results. Slowly, then quickly. She moved to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, then became deputy head, then head. The Minister for Magic post came later, and when it did, she was the most qualified person who had ever held the office, by a significant margin. Here's what most people miss. Hermione didn't become minister because she was famous. Plenty of famous witches and wizards never got near the office. She became minister because she had spent 20 years learning every lever in the building and pulling the right ones at the right time. The fame was incidental. The competence was the point. She also found time to write extensively on magical theory, raise 2 children, and remain the only person who regularly made Harry Potter feel slightly underprepared. Ron took a different path, one that had nothing to do with the Ministry and everything to do with the joke shop. Ron Weasley. Ron became an Auror. Then he quit. He served for a few years alongside Harry, which is probably what he always imagined doing. Fight dark wizards, be one of the good ones, come home in one piece. He did all 3. And then George called. Fred's death had left George running the shop alone. And alone is not a word that should follow George Weasley under any circumstances. Ron stepped in as co-owner, and the 2 of them rebuilt Weasley's Wizard Wheezes into one of the most successful businesses in Diagon Alley. This is the part wizarding historians tend to gloss over. Ron Weasley, strategist, the chess player, the boy who could read a room and a battlefield both. It turns out those skills transfer remarkably well to retail management. The shop thrived. It is also the more emotionally honest version of Ron's story. He didn't need to be Harry. He never did. Speaking of filling a gap that shouldn't have existed, George Weasley had already been carrying that shop on his own before Ron arrived. George Weasley. George kept the shop open. That is, depending on your perspective, either the most impressive thing anyone on this list did after the war, or the saddest. Possibly both. He lost his twin at the Battle of Hogwarts. Fred and George had built Weasley's Wizard Wheezes together, named it together, stocked its shelves with jokes and tricks and products they invented together. Half the shop's identity was Fred, and George kept it open anyway. He eventually married Angelina Johnson, Fred's former date to the Yule Ball, which is either beautifully cyclical or the wizarding world doing its usual thing of refusing to make grief simple. He had 2 children, named his son Fred. The shop grew. George hired staff. He expanded the product range. He never stopped. Not everyone who lost something in the war stayed to rebuild it. Draco Malfoy is the clearest example of someone who walked away entirely. Draco Malfoy did not become an Auror. He did not join the ministry. He did not open a shop, publish a memoir, or take a teaching post. Post-war records for Draco are conspicuously quiet. What is known is that he married Astoria Greengrass, a match considered unremarkable by pureblood standards, but which, given Astoria's views on blood purity, represented a quiet but meaningful break from the Malfoy tradition. They had 1 son, Scorpius, and that appears to have been Draco's project. Not the family legacy, not the Malfoy name, just raising one good child in a family that had spent generations producing the opposite. Astoria died young, from a blood curse that had run through her family line. After that, it was Draco and Scorpius. Drop your take in the comments, because Draco's post-war silence is either the most cowardly exit in wizarding history or the most, self-aware one. I genuinely can't decide. What is documented is that Scorpius grew up curious, kind, and well-read. That does not happen by accident. If Draco's story is about stepping back from the world, Percy Weasley's is about clawing his way back into it. Percy Weasley. Percy spent most of the war on the wrong side of history. Not Voldemort's side. Worse, in some ways. The Ministry's side. The side that told itself it was being reasonable. He came back to the family at the Battle of Hogwarts. He helped fight. He watched Fred die. After the war, Percy returned to the Ministry and built a career so relentlessly competent that it is difficult to be annoyed at him even if you want to be. He rose to Senior Undersecretary to the Minister of Magic, the right hand of whoever held the office, the person who actually knew where all the files were and what they said. Here's the thing about Percy that most people miss. He was never stupid. He was compliant. Those are 2 different problems. A stupid person in a corrupt institution does damage because they don't know better. A compliant person does damage because they do know better and choose not to act. Percy's post-war career looks a lot like a man spending 20 years making that distinction up to everyone, including himself. Whether he succeeded is generously a matter of interpretation. Not everyone's post-war story is defined by ambition. Some people just quietly became exactly what they were always going to be. Neville Longbottom. Neville Longbottom became an Auror. Then he became an herbology professor. And in a list of people who rebuilt the wizarding world, Neville may have had the most impact on any of them. Not through law or politics, but through a greenhouse. He served as an Auror for a few years post-war. He was good at it. He was always better in a crisis than anyone expected, which, if you paid attention at Hogwarts, was completely predictable. But Hogwarts called him back. He became the herbology professor, and later, head of Gryffindor House. The boy who was told he wasn't good enough at everything grew up to become the person telling the next generation they were. Here's what makes this land differently than it should. Neville spent his entire education being compared to a standard he couldn't meet. His teachers, with 1 or 2 notable exceptions, largely wrote him off. He went back anyway and spent his career making sure nobody in his classroom felt the way he had. Gran Longbottom reportedly cried. She denies this. Luna Longbottom. Luna Scamander. Luna Lovegood. Luna became a magi zoologist. Obviously. She spent the years after the war doing exactly what she always said she was going to do. Traveling the world, documenting creatures that most of the wizarding establishment refused to acknowledge existed. She was right about some of them. The official record has never fully caught up with her. She married Rolf Scamander, grandson of Newt Scamander, the man who wrote Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Luna Lovegood marrying into the family that literally wrote the book on magical creatures is the most on-brand outcome for any character in this entire list. She had 2 sons, named Lorcan and Lysander, which are the 2 most Luna Lovegood names possible, and she clearly knew exactly what she was doing. She never really cared what people thought. She still doesn't. The creatures she studies are better company anyway. Ginny Weasley also ended up exactly where she was supposed to. She just took the long route to get there. Ginny Weasley. Ginny became a professional Quidditch player for the Holyhead Harpies. She was brilliant at it. Then she retired and became the Daily Prophet's senior Quidditch correspondent, which is either a graceful transition or a way of staying close to the sport she loved without the part where professional athletes retire at 32 with bad knees. The career arc is the most straightforward on this list, which is slightly ironic given that Ginny Weasley is one of the least straightforward people in it. She had 3 children with Harry: James Sirius, Albus Severus, which remains one of the more aggressive naming decisions in wizarding history, and Lily Luna. She remained one of the few people in Harry's life who treated him like a person rather than a symbol. After a childhood spent being the boy who lived, that was probably worth more than any career. Bill Weasley never left his career at all. Some people find the war and it changes everything. Bill found it and went back to Gringotts. Bill Weasley. Bill kept curse breaking. His face bore permanent scarring from the Fenrir Greyback attack at the end of the war. Scars that never fully healed, even with magical treatment. He stayed at Shell Cottage with Fleur and their family. Fleur worked part-time at Gringotts and spent the rest of her time raising their children: Victoire, Dominique, and Louis. Shell Cottage, which had been a refuge for hunted people during the war, became something quieter, a home. Bill was always the competent older sibling who went out and did the actual difficult work, while everyone else was still figuring out what they wanted to be. He stayed exactly that. Some people don't need a dramatic reinvention. His children are the next generation of Weasleys. Victoire Weasley famously ended up with Teddy Lupin. Hogwarts, apparently, remains a small world. The last 2 entries belong to Hogwarts itself, because 2 people stayed and shaped every student who came after them. Horace Slughorn. Slugghorn retired. He had come back to fight at the Battle of Hogwarts. The old collector of rare things finally admitting that some things were worth fighting for, even when it was expensive. And when it was over, he stepped down. He had been teaching for decades. He had watched most of his former students end up either dead or on trial. His famous collection of promising young wizards had not performed especially well. He lived on in quiet comfort, presumably eating crystallized pineapple and reading thank you notes from former students who had done well. Slughorn always kept score. In the end, the score was fine. He stayed on the right side when it mattered. That has to count for something, even for a man who spent most of his career carefully avoiding the moments when it mattered. Slughorn leaving Hogwarts created one of the great quiet vacancies in wizarding history. McGonagall filled the larger one. Minerva McGonagall. McGonagall became headmistress of Hogwarts. And if you are surprised by this, you were not paying attention. She had been deputy headmistress under Dumbledore. She had held the school together under Snape's occupation. Quietly, carefully, without giving the Death Eaters on the staff enough rope to know exactly what she was doing. She had stood on the school's front steps during the final battle and faced Voldemort's army. When Dumbledore died and the school needed a head, there was exactly one answer. What most accounts understate is the scale of what she inherited. Hogwarts, in the immediate post-war period, was not a functioning school. It was a battlefield that happened to have classrooms in it. Students had been subjected to a year of systematic abuse under the Carrows. The staff who had collaborated needed to be replaced. The students who had survived needed to be taught. And not just charms and transfiguration. They needed to be shown that the institution they had been handed was worth trusting again. McGonagall rebuilt it. Methodically, without fanfare, she recruited new staff. She restructured the curriculum. She reportedly had one meeting with the ministry about restoring appropriate oversight of Hogwarts that lasted 4 minutes before the ministry representative decided that they had somewhere else to be. She remained headmistress for decades. The open question, the one the entire list has been building toward, is what Hogwarts would look like today without her. Every student who sat those newts, every Auror trained, every minister briefed, every generation that came through that castle after the war passed through a school McGonagall rebuilt from rubble. Harry Potter defeated Voldemort. Minerva McGonagall made sure there was something left worth saving. She was always the most dangerous person in that school. She just never needed anyone to know it. Every one of these careers was shaped by choices made long before the war ended. Who raised them? Who taught them? And who stepped in when no one else would? What if every other character raised Harry Potter? The decisions that could have changed everything, explored in full.